Thank you very much, Minister Malcolmson, for your remarks and for starting us off with so much energy this morning. As is tradition, we're going to take a quick photo and present a speaker gift. And while they're wrapping up there, I'm just going to remind the audience as we transition into our first panel of the day that we do have Slido. Audience members, please submit your questions and vote on your favorites. Our moderator will try to get to those as they can. And with that, it is now my pleasure to introduce the next session and our moderator, MLA George Anderson, from right here in Nanaimo, Lanceville. George was also just recently appointed the Parliamentary Secretary for Energy and Climate Solutions. Congratulations, George, on that new appointment. And I'd like to invite him up here to moderate our next panel and invite our panelists up for Rising Tides Lift All Boats, Collaborative Economic Development in Nanaimo. So let's give our panel a round of applause.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all, a big, full room. My name's George Anderson, the Parliamentary Secretary for Energy and Climate Solutions. It's the first time I've said that out loud, so... So great to be here with all of you, and one of the great things about this panel about raising tides that lifts all boats and collaborative economic development here in Nanaimo is that last year in April, Snuneymuxw First Nations, DP World, and the Port of Nanaimo, in collaboration with the federal government and provincial government, were able to see the expansion of the Duke Point Terminal here in Nanaimo. And that's going to increase tenfold, I believe, the abilities of our port capacity here in Nanaimo. So we have Erralyn Thomas from Snuneymuxw First Nation and also the president of Petroglyph Development. We have the board chair of the Port of Nanaimo, and also who is Donna Hayes, and then we have the CEO of DP World, Douglas Smith. If you go online, you'll be able to read their entire bio, so I hope that you'll go and do that, and if you'd like, you can give a couple of comments, and then we'll jump into questions. Erralyn.
Testing. Sure. Well, I need to siam na siaya, siam na soljuan, etape hanquithia tanitana Snuneymuxw. Good morning, everybody. I welcome you to Hosalachol, Snuneymuxw Village this morning to conduct this important business. My name is Hanquithia Erralyn Joseph, and I'm glad to be here with you today. Honoring my colleagues to my left, it's been a pleasure working with you, and I look forward to the trailblazing the future together. It's very important when we're unlocking economic development that we respect and recognize the rights and the jurisdictions and the territory. And in this case, you know, Snuneymuxw's Treaty of 1854, we signed 171 years ago. And what it does is it's a trade and commerce treaty. So it's very important as we open up our doors to trade and we broker relationships with Doug and Donna that we create that foundational premise upon which we can move forward and conquer any challenge, not only with industry or the Nanaimo Port Authority, but also with your government, George. I think it's important, and which we have done with our Reconciliation Implementation Framework Agreement that we signed in 2020 with Minister Malcolmson and late Premier John Horgan. You know, in this era, it's very important to keep in mind the reimagining the economy and revitalizing the economy all in our territory, and do that through partnership. You know, we didn't just, the Nanaimo First Nation didn't just sign 12 agreements in the last 8 years and buy 5 casinos through challenge or litigation. you know, we do that through partnership and respecting each other and working together. And through that lens, we can conquer anything. You know, and key is talking about our challenges. I think we've done a good job at talking about our challenges with expanding DP World's terminal that is governed by the Nanaimo Port Authority out in Duke Point in Snuneymuxw of Snuneymuxw territory. And, you know, that's been very key to transformational partnership, but also revitalizing the Duke Point area out here. It's over 2,000 acres, multi-billions of economic potential out there. So this partnership is an example of how we can get things done and unlock economic development together through respect, cooperation, and reconciliation. So I'll leave it there. 3 minutes isn't long, George. We're all politicians, well, some of us. So thank you, and I look forward to the questions.
Absolutely. Well, as you know, anytime you get an elected official with a microphone, it's hard to get it away from them, so myself included. But Donna, you'll have a minute to do a brief introduction, and the same for you, Doug.
Thank you, George. As mentioned, my name is Donna Hayes, and I am the board chair of the Nanaimo Port Authority. And on behalf of the Port Authority, I want to acknowledge that we live, work, and play in the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nations. I personally feel honored to have been asked to sit on this panel today. I feel honored to actually sit at the table with Nanaimo on a daily basis. I would say we're more than just partners and colleagues. We've become family and friends. And there's a deep realization and understanding at our table that the work we do is critical to community and can only happen through partnership with our First Nations. And so I feel really honored to sit at this table and to share today the work that we're doing and that we see as moving forward. I also want to acknowledge that we're just in those beginning days of the work. And the work that we're doing is hard work. It's not easy work. It's groundbreaking. It's record setting. It's innovative. It's creative. And it has to be done with a different mindset. And we come to that table every day with that. And I want to thank you for inviting us to be part of today's discussion.
Doug?
Okay, that's a lot to follow. So I'm Doug Smith, CEO World, now I lose my own voice. CEO of DP World in Canada. I do not have the same amount of history as my honored guests next to me. I recently only came here 3 years ago and got deep into understanding what is going on. But I can echo exactly what Erralyn and Donna said, is that I'm honored to be here to be part of this. I think we have built a very good foundation in a short period of time that we've been involved. And we're thinking long term. This is worth getting through this. This is worth doing it. And when I say long term, we think in 50 to 75 years. This isn't just to do for the sake of it. This isn't giving it a facade. This is doing something for real that makes a difference to the communities, to where we operate, and how we can really form essential partnerships that will drive things for many years to come and build it on the right foundations. So I'm honored to be part of this, and I look forward to the questions on how we did it and what we're going to do next.
Well, great introductions, and I think we're all looking forward to a phenomenal conversation here. The title of this panel is Rising Tides Lifts All Boats. And what I'd like to ask all of you is, what does success look like for each of you? But as you consider that, we know that benefits don't necessarily grow automatically for each group. And so I'd like you to consider who might be left behind, and how do we ensure that in Nanaimo we don't allow that to happen. So Erralyn, please go, or Donna, you're first up.
Okay, I love just being put on the spot. What does success look like for us? I think success looks like, what it looks like for us is open and clear communication on all levels, at all forefronts. You know, there needs to be a time in the discussion, and you know, I can speak to, I've been with the Port now for about 11 years, and I can say that 11 years ago, sitting at that table, when a topic or business opportunity came to the forefront, the first thought or the first conversation in the room wasn't, hey, have we called Chief and Council to talk to them about what this means for the nation? So we're 11 years later, and there isn't a topic that doesn't come to our table where we're saying, have we talked to Chief and Council? You know, it's not It's not unlikely that at 6:30 in the morning that I'm getting a text from Erralyn because she thinks I'm maybe not awake saying, good morning. That didn't happen this morning, but it happened yesterday. And so, communication for us is going to be the key to success going forward. I would say the other piece that faces, and I think I can speak openly for all ports, is that we're federal agencies that live and exist within a box. We have very strict guidelines around how we can act. We have very strict guidelines what our mandate is. And I think what it takes in today's conversation to see true success is you need to get outside of your box. You need to figure out creative ways to communicate. You need to figure out creative and innovative ways to approach problems and what can be seen as obstacles, and be courageous enough to have new conversations. And the one thing that I've always appreciated in my relationship with Erralyn and with Chief and with the rest of council is, the opportunity that door was never closed. It was always open and left open for us as a port to go and have a conversation. And that invitation or that open door allowed us to step through and start having those bigger, most difficult conversations. And so for what success looks like, 20 years from now, we're getting there in small steps, but it's complete, I would say, integration and conversation. And so we don't now have to physically think of who's the first person we communicate. They're sitting right beside me, so I don't have to think about that.
Yourself, Doug, you heard what Donna's had to say. How would you look at the benefits and success for you, but also how do we ensure that the individuals who might see growth actually see it tangibly in the near term rather than lost?
Okay. I think there's a few things to that formula. Obviously, it has to be built on trust and transparency. And that's first and foremost. And that's what we have established right what we have today, is we're very straightforward with it and we're building on that. But I think it's important that a framework that has a eternalness to it. It's not dependent on Donna, myself, or Erralyn, that it's going to happen. We build it in, we make it systemic. And that's really important. So, and then what does that look like? Obviously, as a port operator, I want to see the port double and keep doubling, and I want to keep it growing. But I want to see it part of an ecosystem. The island should not be an island. This should be part of all of BC. This should be supporting a larger ecosystem to where the value is built constantly. And there is that opportunity. So you're not leaving someone behind. And some of the things we talk about, and we can get into a little bit later, there are these opportunities that are a lot bigger than I think we even realize today. And so how do you create success? Well, you create success so that you can realize that it's not dependent on an individual.
Great. Erralyn?
Thank you, George, for that question. I think, thinking back prior to the newcomers, Snuneymuxw welcomed everybody to our territory 18 decades plus ago, and we were very honorable in doing so. We signed a treaty on December 23rd of 1854 that preserves and protects our villages, our cultivated fields, and our rights to fisheries and hunt as formerly. Unfortunately, 2 days later, Sir James Douglas starts selling our land off to the ENN Railway and everybody else, and they didn't have the Crown didn't have the legal authority to do so. 17 decades later, the industrialization of our territory generated the provincial economy that we experience today. It is the backbone of what started 170 years ago to create the economy that we have today. So the Snuneymuxw people were very much left behind in the development of the provincial and federal and international economy. It's through relationships like this with the Nanaimo Port Authority and DP World with the leadership of Doug that we create inclusion. That's success for the Snuneymuxw people, but all First Nations people and the communities who live within the municipalities and the nations. That requires communication, trust, transparency. It took us 6 years to sign our agreement with the Port Authority for the terminal expansion out at Duke Point. And while that might seem long, it's really short And in that 6 years, we talked about a lot of issues. And we stayed at the table. You remember that? We stayed at the table. You know, they're very vibrant and dynamic conversations, but we were able to get there. And that is key, is that we stay at the table, we keep talking about the issues, and we get to a mutually beneficial, cooperative, and respectful relationship. That's a principled approach for compromise, respect, and recognition. And I think in the economy that we have today, and we're going forward, George, those kinds of relationships are very important to unlock economic development, whether you're in mining, especially mining, because it's often in the villages of the First Nations, requires respect and recognition and conversation. Or forestry is another big one, or terminal expansions in the port. You know, the port is the #1 area in our view where we need to focus our resources to revitalize not only the local economy, but the provincial and global economy. You know, how things go through the Panama Canal, or it comes up, or, you know, it goes through the Malacca, and DP World represents a strong position in the global economic trade and the Port Authority. So I think inclusion and communication are success stories, and we don't want to leave anybody behind, like the city of Nanaimo or residents or the government. You know, we need your government to keep up with us and to believe in the vision that we have with Duke Point and revitalizing the 2,000 acres out there. It served its purpose, Duke Point has. We need to reimagine it, revitalize it, reinvest in it, industrial development, but through respect and cooperation and the recognition of rights. I think also for us, success means capacity. You know, I have a lot of my team in the room today. I acknowledge all your support with Hilda, Hannah, Taylor, our CEO, Ian Simpson, who is leading the charge at Petroglyph Development Group. We've grown under his leadership by 388% in the last 6 years. That's astronomical. So these partnerships help us continue to lay the groundwork to help you realize, and Minister Malcolmson, the economy that you want to see under Premier Eby and Prime Minister Carney. So I think that those are keys to success.
And so what's clear to me is that interdependence amongst all of the groups to be able to ensure that we're realizing our economic potential. And that leads to a further question as to how would you be able to move forward in a way that provides economic development for our province and our country? But what's one thing that you need from the other person who's on this stage right now in order to be able to accomplish that? So we're going to start with you, Doug.
Okay. Well, you're essentially talking about collaboration. And, you know, one thing I always talk about, when you want to define something, it's always about operational definition. What does collaboration really mean? And when I say operational definition, and my team knows, they hear me say this a lot, think of a chair. You think of a chair, I think of a chair. I guarantee you your chair is not my chair. All right? Fabric, metal, wheels, no wheels, and the list goes on. So let's define collaboration. Okay? This is not about I give you what I don't want to do. And I have plenty of businesses across Canada where that's exactly what we're doing. We take up the contract from someone else who doesn't want to do it. That's not collaboration, that's support. That's just a business. Collaboration is when together we do something we couldn't do alone, that we amplify, that it grows. So it's really important that all parties at the table understand that and have the resolve to take it to that point. And exactly what Erralyn was talking about, that was our initial conversations. What does it mean? What is Nanaimo looking for? What is MPA looking for? What's DP World looking for? Take the time to have that hard conversation. Are they mutual? Are they exclusive? And if you can get that right, get the right partners, and I believe in coalitions. So what we'd like to do is, there should be about a few more chairs here. There's a few other people missing that need to come into this to represent other organizations that need to be part of this to really amplify it. We are just the beginning. So I think it's a real part of what comes next is recognizing who's willing to be at that table that understands that this is not about me winning over you. This is about us amplifying to where the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. and keep those individuals, those companies, those groups constantly engaged in that. And that's who we want to attract. And this will drive a massive growth to where you can ensure you're taking care of everything, you're watching the community, you're growing the right rate, and you keep it a proper balance.
Great. Erralyn?
Thank you for the question. In addition to Doug's comments, I think we need a vision. We need a collective vision to collaborate on, and a principled approach, as I mentioned before. But as Doug just mentioned, getting in the same room and talking about what we want and what we need and how we foresee the east side of Vancouver Island going into the future to 2050 and beyond, and how we pull in the partners into that conversation. And Duke Point is a really big gem, an underutilized gem over there, and it's going to take year by year, quarter by quarter, decade by decade to rebuild it as we see it. So I think having a common vision and hammering that out with industry, but not only with industry, with government, with cabinet, we get together and we get on the same page. So we've always needed that from the Port Authority, from Donna, and she's been very articulate in what the port needs and very strong on a collaboration and sticking to the table and talking things out. And with Doug Smith, he knows what he's talking about trade, about ports and terminals and how it works around the world and creating this ecosystem. We agree 100%. We have to create this ecosystem. The Fraser River is overused. There's no more capacity over there. We're getting stuck in the Salish Sea. The release valve for all the containers and shipping and trade is Vancouver Island. We can build that, and with the expertise of Doug and Donna, we can do that with a common vision. So I think that's been a key consideration to a successful collaborative relationship between us.
Donna?
So I echo both Erralyn and Doug's comments, and then I bring what might seem to be an odd comment to the table, and that's self-awareness. I think an awareness of the value of the organization or the nation or the company that you bring to the table, and keeping those core values forefront in the conversation, and then having those conversations with honesty and transparency like we've talked about. What's really interesting about Nanaimo is that we actually have a national impact on what happens with respect to trade in Canada. We actually have national opportunities that have not been realized in the past. Those opportunities are becoming more clear as we look at the geopolitical world and what's happening globally right now. But when you put organizations like ourselves, when you put a strong nation who knows who they are and knows what they bring to the table, when you bring a global leader in a company in terms of operation of trade, and when you bring a federal entity to the table who understands their roles and their guidelines, and you put us in a room together, and you realize that you can actually have a national and international voice by speaking together, that's when you become impactful, that's when you become powerful. And so us coming to the table at this time, historically, I believe is hugely impactful for our area. I actually believe, and I know it's a question coming up, I can see all the questions being listed here, but I actually believe that through our partnerships, we're going to be able to bring prosperity to Vancouver Island that is impactful. And it impacts other things. It impacts conversations that I know Minister Malcolmson's having about childhood poverty and how people in our region are getting employment. And so while it is an odd answer, I think self-awareness, who you are, who you represent, bringing that to the table with clarity is really important.
Great. Just for some of you, if you were to join at slido.com at hashtag 3578596, you could add a question, and we're going to go to one of these questions right now. And I'd ask that you give a 30-second answer for these. So the first one is, are there concerns about the additional ocean traffic affecting orca or salmon populations or other fishery concerns? We'll start with you. Erralyn?
Certainly, when we're talking about major trade and transportation highways of Snuneymuxw territory connecting us from the east side of Vancouver Island over to the Fraser River up to the mouth of the Pitt River. You know, we have occupied these areas since time immemorial on the water, so stewardship is important to us. We often have out-of-the-box thoughts on how we can do that with the Ministry of Environment or the federal ministries, but I think that's a very important consideration to create that balance of reciprocity with the Mother Earth, but also with the goal that we're trying to achieve is revitalizing Duke Point and supporting the enhancement of trade in our territory and in the Mid-Island region of Nanaimo.
Great. Donna?
I want to say, yeah, this is a huge concern. And I think we need to address the issue with full awareness of other factors that affect wildlife. So for instance, if we're going to increase traffic, we don't necessarily want the traffic to come here and drop anchor, right? Anchors on the bottom of the ocean floor are hugely damaging to the environment and the ecosystem. Port of Nanaimo is talking about what fixed mooring buoys actually means and how that can create a difference to the ecosystem. We don't want vessels coming here and sitting here waiting. Right? We see it when we fly over to English Bay, how many vessels are waiting in the harbor there to get into Vancouver or in the southern Gulf Islands. That's not an ideal situation. How are we trying to address that? We're working right now with all the ports in BC about creating information and data sharing systems that will allow alternate solutions for those vessels coming in and what the timing looks like. The habitat and keeping it healthy is a primary concern in all of these other associated conversations that we're having, and we need to address them head on.
Doug, I'm going to ask you this question because you seem to be popular in that DP World is a global operator. What drew the company to Nanaimo, and what does Nanaimo need to do to remain competitive as a port destination?
Well, I will address that first question as well, just for reference.
No worries. You're allowed to.
We are very active in maintaining that. We work with a lot of different companies about trying to make sure that ocean traffic does not have an economic and a environmental impact. This is something we are very cognizant of and work with the Port Authority on a regular basis, and I actually believe there is some technology out there. I was actually meeting with a company a few months ago to where if we could actually map the migrations, understand where the marine mammals are, there's no reason why that can't be sitting on the bridge of a ship under what's called Notice of Mariners and actually block off areas on their chart that they cannot transit. So there are solutions, and we do actively work to see what that could be. As far as what brought to Nanaimo, it's really simple. I come in and I see this port that's underutilized. It's on an island that has 1 million people, that's growing, and somehow it's sort of sitting in a corner going, why aren't we doing anything? And that same year that I joined, we had a labor strike that shut down for 14 days. We had multiple ships sitting in the harbor, and it took months to dig this out, and then Nanaimo sitting here, barely used. So just looking at that as a portfolio goes, something's wrong here. Then when I get to know the business and get to know what's going on the island, it just doesn't make sense that it's not growing. So we looked at it internally, and this is why we started up, and it's starting in a few more weeks, is the Salish Sea Gateway. A big part of this is to make it grow, it needs to be connected, and it needs to be part of a larger ecosystem. Why isn't Nanaimo supporting the mainland, the Vancouver area with the relief valve, as Erralyn has said? There's so much opportunity. The question was how to get it going. And my predecessor was trying to do this for many years, and I think this comes back to the topic here. I saw a lot of business plans of DP World this, DP World that. Everything's DP World. And it wasn't going anywhere. After a while, keep repeating things and thinking you're going to get a different result, you need to switch up the game. And that's when I look at this and go, why aren't we partnering? Why aren't we talking to people? Why aren't we thinking this larger? This isn't just a logistics solution. This is a society need. This is an island. It should be connected. It should have a vibrant port. Why doesn't it? So that started the conversations, and And I got to know Erralyn very well through this conversation. I got to know the history and going, okay, there's something here. We need to dig into it. And the more we keep digging into it, the more we find, wait, there's even more. Wait, there's more we don't know about. But it takes that collaboration. It takes that willingness to say, it's not just a product that we need to run. This is, we need to support the community to make this a product. And once that's been realized, we're actually talking now massive other opportunities that we couldn't forecast 2 years ago because we're so busy with the blinders on going, we just need to do this one thing. We just move a box. When you start to think wider, when you start about driving value and actually really caring about what a difference it can make, Nanaimo makes absolute sense. So for us, it's become a no-brainer. How do we do more? And who else can we bring to the table to help this grow?
Great. I want, as we get close to wrapping up here, I'm going to combine a couple of questions, and hopefully you can also keep your comments as close to what the question is as possible. But right now we're dealing with some difficult economic times, political headwinds with a guy down south who makes a lot of different decisions. But I want you to imagine that we're in 2035 and people have said Nanaimo has got it right. What would they be pointing to, and what would you be saying, and what would you be saying to an 18-year-old student, a local business owner, or Nanaimo First Nations families about how they are benefiting? So we'll start with Donna.
So I'm going to have to broaden the conversation from just this relationship to answer that question. And maybe it started at this table, but Erralyn and I actually sit on a lot of committees together. So we sit on a mayor's leaders table, for example. So what are we going to tell someone 30 years from now that was a success and it was true collaboration over and above the port? Erralyn and I sit at a table right now where our entire community, that involves our universities, our school districts, our hospitals, our ports, our airports, the nations, all of us are actually in a master planning session where we are all sharing what our goals, outcomes, and strategic plans look like and how we can actually work together and leverage each other's access to various levels of government, and create joint projects that bring true prosperity to our community. So, you know, I think we probably started at this table together, but from this table, we've been able to leverage that on much larger tables. And truly, I believe when people look at Nanaimo, they're going to say that we were a leader. And why were we a leader? We were a leader because we realized early on that we're only truly strong and truly successful by working together and strategically collaborating.
Doug?
Well, to forecast out 20 years, I think let's look back 20. When the iPhone came out, everyone said it would be useless. Think about that for a second. And then look where it is today. So what I would take pride in and hope that we're able to do is we've created things we can't even think of right now. Jobs, doing things, careers that have happened, driving society in ways that give benefit that we can't list on a piece of paper right now. And we've created that foundation for that to happen, and we can look back to this moment and go, this is where it started.
Erralyn?
Yeah, I think investing in economic reconciliation and creating pathways to achieve economic reconciliation have intangible and tangible benefits for the world in general. You know, not only at the dinner table with jobs, enhanced quality of life, training, strengthening families, increasing opportunities for families to access education and health and housing and things like that by strengthening our economy, but it also creates a more just society that's respectful and recognizes each other. You know, Nanaimo has a history. 151 municipalities in the province all have a history with the local First Nations in whose territory that the municipalities are at. You know, often that's a stigma, or in some cases they've modernized and they've evolved and they've become more respectful and they recognize each other. That is a key benefit to the person who's going to be born in 20 years, walking out their door, going to school and feeling part of not judged by the color of their skin or, you know, their economic background or things like that. It's partnerships like these that help create that foundation, but also, as Donna and Doug has mentioned, everybody else has a role in creating that new world as well. So that's what I look forward to and like to spend the rest of my career contributing to, like my colleagues to the left here.
Absolutely. Well, first off, I just want to say thank you all for a really great dynamic conversation about how Nanaimo is helping to lead in port development, but also how Nanaimo, when we just win the next decade and work together in collaboration, that we will actually win the next century. So thank you everyone for a great conversation and for all of you for listening today.
Well, thank you very much, George, and to all the panel. That was a really great session to kick us off today. I see a few people lining the walls. There's lots of seats all around the room. I encourage you to grab a seat. We're going to get started on our next session after these guys have taken a quick picture.